Hello and welcome back to the America Immigration News Channel. Today we're diving deep into one of the most significant changes to American immigration policy in recent years. The United States Congress has just approved sweeping new immigration rules that will fundamentally reshape how America handles immigration, border security, and the processing of people seeking to enter the country. This is a story that affects millions of people around the world, and we're going to break down exactly what happened, what these new rules mean, and how they will impact both Americans and people hoping to come to America. Before we get into the details, let me give you the big picture. On July 1st, 2025, the United States Senate passed a massive piece of legislation called H.R. 1, also known as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. This wasn't an easy vote. The Senate was split right down the middle, 50 votes in favor and 50 votes against. It took Vice President J.D. Vance to break the tie and push the bill through. 2 days later, on July 3rd, the House of Representatives also passed the bill. But again, it was incredibly close, with 218 representatives voting yes and 214 voting no. This tells you just how controversial and divisive this legislation is. But regardless of the controversy, it is now law, and it represents the most significant overhaul of American immigration policy in decades. So what exactly is in this new law? Let's start with the money, because the numbers here are absolutely staggering. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act allocates $170.7 billion for immigration and border enforcement activities. That's not a typo, $170 billion. To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire GDP of many countries around the world. This money will be used to hire more Border Patrol agents, purchase new technology for surveillance and detection, increase the number of immigration judges, and expand operations at ports of entry. The government is making it clear that enforcement is the top priority, but that's not all. The bill also sets aside $45 billion specifically for building new immigration detention centers. $45 billion for detention facilities. This represents a massive expansion of America's immigration detention system. Currently, the United States has the capacity to detain tens of thousands of immigrants at any given time. With this new funding, that capacity could potentially double or even triple. These detention centers are facilities where people who are waiting for their immigration cases to be processed are held. This could include people who crossed the border without authorization, people who overstayed their visas, or people whose asylum claims are being reviewed. The expansion of detention capacity signals that the government expects to be detaining far more people than it currently does. Now let's talk about the border wall, because that's another major component of this legislation. The new law provides $46.5 billion for the construction, installation, or improvement of physical barriers along the southern border of the United States. This includes money for building new sections of wall, reinforcing existing barriers, creating access roads so Border Patrol agents can reach remote areas, and installing technology like cameras and sensors along the barrier system. The border wall has been one of the most politically divisive issues in American politics for years, with supporters arguing it's necessary for national security and opponents saying it's ineffective and environmentally damaging. Regardless of where you stand on that debate, the fact is that this massive investment in physical barriers is now happening. But perhaps one of the most controversial aspects of this new law is what critics are calling a pay-to-play system. The legislation significantly increases fees for various immigration applications and processes. If you want to apply for asylum in the United States, you'll now have to pay higher fees. If you're requesting temporary protected status, which is a form of humanitarian relief for people from countries experiencing armed conflict, natural disasters, or other extraordinary conditions, you'll pay more. If you want to request deportation relief or file motions in immigration court, the costs have gone up substantially. Critics argue that this creates a system where only people with money can access the legal immigration system, effectively pricing out the most vulnerable people who are fleeing persecution, violence, or poverty. Supporters of these fee increases argue that they help fund the immigration system and ensure that people have skin in the game when making claims. Beyond the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, there are other legislative efforts underway as well. In July 2025, Representative Maria Elvira Salazar introduced something called the Dignity Act of 2025. This is being described as a bipartisan bill, meaning it has support from both Democrats and Republicans, which is increasingly rare in today's polarized political environment. The Dignity Act takes a somewhat different approach. While it also focuses on strengthening border security, it includes provisions that would provide undocumented individuals who are already living in the United States with an opportunity to obtain legal status if they meet certain requirements. This is significant because there are an estimated 11 million people currently living in the United States without legal authorization. The Dignity Act would also update aspects of the legal immigration system, potentially making it easier for people to come to the United States through legal channels. However, it's important to note that the Dignity Act has only been introduced, not passed. It still needs to make its way through committee hearings, floor debates, and votes in both the House and Senate before it could become law. While Congress has been working on legislation, the executive branch hasn't been sitting idle either. The Trump administration has implemented numerous policy changes through executive action. One of the most significant is the pause on refugee admissions. The United States has a refugee resettlement program that brings people who are fleeing persecution to America to start new lives. This program has been temporarily halted. Additionally, visa processing has been suspended for 75 countries around the world. This means that people from these countries cannot currently obtain visas to visit, study, or work in the United States. The administration has also ended several humanitarian parole programs. These are programs that allowed people from certain countries experiencing crises to temporarily come to the United States for humanitarian reasons. So, what does all of this mean in practical terms? Let's break it down by looking at how these changes affect different groups of people. First, for people who are already living in the United States without legal authorization, the massive increase in detention capacity and enforcement funding means there will likely be more arrests and deportations. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, known as ICE, will have more resources to conduct operations in communities across the country. The expanded detention system means that more people will be held in custody while their cases are processed, rather than being released with monitoring requirements. For people hoping to seek asylum in the United States, the new fee requirements create an additional barrier. Asylum is supposed to be a protection available to people who are fleeing persecution based on their race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. In theory, the ability to seek asylum shouldn't depend on your ability to pay fees. But under the new system, financial resources become a factor in accessing this protection. Additionally, with the expansion of detention capacity, people who arrive at the border to seek asylum are more likely to be detained while their cases are processed, rather than being released into the United States to await their hearings. For people in countries around the world who want to visit, study, or work in the United States legally, the suspension of visa processing from 75 countries creates obvious challenges. If you're from one of those countries, you simply cannot get a visa right now, regardless of the purpose of your trip or your qualifications. Even for people from countries not on that list, the overall emphasis on enforcement and restriction means that visa applications are being scrutinized more carefully. Processing times may be longer, and approval rates may be lower. For refugees fleeing persecution and hoping for resettlement in the United States, the pause on the refugee program means that pathway is currently closed. The United States has historically been one of the world's leading countries for refugee resettlement, taking in tens of thousands of refugees each year. But with the program paused, refugees who have already been approved for resettlement are in limbo, waiting to find out when or if they'll be able to come to America. It's also worth considering the broader implications of these changes. The United States has long seen itself as a nation of immigrants, with the Statue of Liberty symbolizing welcome to people from around the world. These new policies represent a significant shift toward restriction and enforcement. Supporters argue that this is necessary to protect American jobs, ensure national security, and maintain the rule of law. They point out that many countries have strict immigration policies and that the United States has the right to control its borders and determine who enters the country. They argue that the previous system was being abused, with people making false asylum claims or entering the country illegally, and that these new measures restore order to a broken system. Critics, on the other hand, argue that these policies are cruel and counterproductive. They point out that many people seeking to come to the United States are fleeing violence, persecution, or desperate economic conditions, and that turning them away violates America's humanitarian obligations. They argue that the massive spending on walls and detention is wasteful, and that the money would be better spent addressing the root causes of migration in other countries. They also note that immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, contribute to the American economy, and that mass deportations could harm industries that rely on immigrant labor. The debate over these policies reflects deep divisions in American society about national identity, economic priorities, and moral obligations. Looking ahead, it's clear that immigration will continue to be one of the most contentious political issues in the United States. The implementation of these new rules will take time, and there will likely be legal challenges to various provisions. Immigration advocacy organizations are already preparing lawsuits arguing that some of these policies violate constitutional rights or international law. Courts will ultimately have to weigh in on many aspects of this new system. Additionally, the political landscape could shift. If there's a change in political power in future elections, some of these policies could be reversed or modified. Immigration policy in the United States has historically swung back and forth depending on which political party is in power. It's also important to remember that immigration is a global issue, not just an American one. Migration flows are driven by complex factors including economic inequality, climate change, political instability, and violence. Countries around the world are grappling with how to manage immigration in ways that balance security concerns, economic needs, and humanitarian obligations. The United States is just one piece of this larger global puzzle. What happens with American immigration policy doesn't just affect the United States and people hoping to come here. It also influences immigration policies in other countries and affects global migration patterns. For those of you watching who might be personally affected by these changes, whether you're hoping to immigrate to the United States, you have family members there, or you're living in the U.S. yourself, it's important to stay informed and seek reliable information from qualified immigration attorneys or accredited representatives. Immigration law is extremely complex, and these new changes add additional layers of complexity. Don't rely on rumors or information from unreliable sources. If you're navigating the immigration system, make sure you understand your rights and options. As we wrap up, let's summarize the key points. The United States Congress has approved major new immigration legislation in 2025. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act provides over $200 billion for border security, enforcement, and detention. It includes massive funding for physical barriers along the southern border and a huge expansion of detention capacity. The law also increases fees for asylum applications and other immigration processes. Additionally, executive actions have paused refugee admissions, suspended visa processing for many countries, and ended humanitarian parole programs. Representative Salazar has introduced the Bipartisan Dignity Act, which takes a different approach by including pathways to legal status for some undocumented immigrants, but this bill has not yet passed. These changes represent a fundamental shift in American immigration policy toward enforcement and restriction. The debate over these policies reflects deep disagreements about what kind of country America should be, how it should balance security and compassion, and what obligations it has to people from other countries seeking better lives. This is a story that will continue to develop in the months and years ahead, and we'll be here to keep you informed as new developments unfold. Thank you so much for watching today's video. This is one of the most important policy changes happening in the world right now, and I hope this breakdown helped you understand what's really going on. If you found this information valuable, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future updates. Share this with anyone who might be affected by these immigration changes or who wants to understand what's happening in American politics. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think about these new immigration rules. Do you think they're necessary for security, or do you believe they go too far? I'd love to hear your perspective. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.